Reef Monitoring Incorporated has been doing fish counts now for about 5 years. The main reason then to put together some type of baseline so we have a pretty good idea of what fish are populating our inshore reefs. Yeah. The artificial reefs that we've chosen to use this study are actually only 3 artificial reefs of a large system Pinellas County has, with maybe 20 or 25 different artificial reefs that have been built over the years. So we deliberately picked in artificial reefs that had not been in the water long enough to have properly matured. Natural reefs that we chose this one are ones that are not marked on the charts and are not really well known to the fishermen. So almost never then when we come up to the reef to make our study will we have to worry about interfering with anglers that were anchored up on the reef. Whereas the artificial reefs, very often there'd be numerous boats out there when we went out to make our study. We found there then that we're making invertebrate counts that those generally are pretty much stable all year round. Things like starfish, urchins, various types of crabs. These are ones then that didn't seem to have very much variability then between seasons. And really the main part of our counts in this particular study were mainly dealing with the vertebrates, with the fish. We did find some seasonality in certain ones of the species, particularly the great barracuda and the Spanish mackerel were a lot more common then during the warmer months of spring and summer. On the other hand then, the amberjack generally appeared there in the cooler months. We start seeing large amberjacks coming in then typically in late fall, typically October, November, in many cases having peak numbers there then, typically on into the warmer winter months. Same is true with sheephead. Sheephead would be much larger numbers of them then during the colder months of December and January when they were getting ready for their spawning. After that then they would spread out and we find them then just 1s and 2s instead of in large numbers. Barracuda, surprisingly, were a little bit less towards the end of our study. Again, those are the ones that we used to see in rather large numbers. Now it seems like a little bit less numbers, in part probably because of a heavy fishing pressure. The snapper, on the other hand, the snapper and the grunts are pretty much immune to much seasonal. We'd find a little bit less maybe in the really cold months of the winter. But for the most part then, the snapper and the grunt population stayed quite high and pretty uniform.
We had 6 total light traps and we deployed them on artificial and natural reefs within Pinellas County, and we used 3 artificial reefs and 2 natural ledges. And what we did was we paired them so that we had light traps on an artificial reef and then on a nearby natural ledge being sampled on the same night. We did all of our sampling over 2 nights around the new moon each month, and then those were brought back to the lab and sorted. There was a huge assortment of different kinds of plankton in these samples, but the fish were separated out and then identified to family, to genus, or to species if possible. The collections of the larvae were interesting because the species that we found were a variation. We had a lot of clupeids, but we excluded those from most of the analysis because they're not considered to be resident demersal fishes. They are roving, schooling fish, so they're not really part of the assemblage on the reef. So what were left with then were the demersal resident fishes, and those represented an array of different kinds of fish. We had herbivores, we had carnivores, we had some cryptic species, mostly the smaller fishes that form more of a base of the food chain, but we also had some more higher predators within those samples. In conclusion, when we look at both numbers of fish being delivered and the different kinds of families, the diversity in the families that are being delivered to both artificial and natural reefs, we find no difference. And so this is an indication that at least as far as the delivery of larvae to artificial reefs, that it is equal to that at the natural ledges. And so we find that the artificial reefs are both receiving the same kinds, the same species, same numbers of larvae as the natural ledges that are close by, and that those larvae correspond to what we're finding on the artificial and the natural reefs, and so they reflect the recruitment to those reefs as well.
We took a total of 93 samples. Of the 93 samples, we were able to process 81 of them for biological content. What we were looking at was trying to build a correlation between the sediment coarseness and biological organisms. We first looked at an impact area of 50 meters away from the reef structure for both natural and artificial reefs, and found that we were still finding some coarser material in the sediment samples. We ended up later in the project extending that control out to 100 meters, where we went away from all the coarse material. We did find a more diverse population of infaunal organisms on an artificial reef, or just adjacent to an artificial reef, than what we did on a natural ledge. The primary contributors to the populations being nematodes and annelids, or roundworms and segmented worms. In the biological content, we looked at diversity, biomass, and an unexpected result we saw in the later samples was that the infaunal populations seem to be somewhat seasonal, and this could lead to further or future research.
Many studies have shown then that the total carrying capacity of an area of the Gulf is greatly increased by an artificial reef. In a natural reef, the habitat is provided in by geological processes, and the fish just happen to find that a good place to live. On the other hand, on an artificial reef, when scientifically sited and built, means then we can actually get more fish habitat, because now we are deliberately shaping the habitat to favor then the various type of fish species that we can use then for food. The whole reason then for building artificial reefs has been the fact that our natural reefs have pretty much a fixed situation. We aren't getting any new ones built. On the other hand, in a crowded state like the state of Florida, we have then an ever-increasing angler population, an ever-increasing diver population. So with no new natural reefs being built and more anglers and divers coming in, then the catch per unit effort has gone down drastically in the last 30 or 40 years. So the whole idea then of artificial reef building then is to start trying to catch up again, to try and build enough artificial reefs that now our habitat to angler ratio is back like a good, what the old timers talk about, the good old days. They could get a lot more fish than we can nowadays.